Okay, I'm here with Leland Cole. We're using my Facebook Messenger and recording to disk for rebroadcast. We have a little bit of a yearly recap and some issues to discuss with the future of California and other legalizing marijuana states. And I'd like to introduce Mr. Leland Cole, who's been an advocate and activist for many years and can only express things in ways that I cannot, and wish to bring him on to share with you the future. Hi, Leland.
Hello, and I'm not so sure that it's a bright future or not. Right now, all we're doing is adding up all the moves that have been made by the Trump administration and what we're doing as a movement, and it doesn't look bright. It's true that in the end, our president will have to make the final decision on what's going to happen, but until then, those interested in those that have their own vested interests are making their preparations in the event that their sun shines on them. We have, for instance, ex-Senator Sessions, who's now the Attorney General. What has he done? He's gotten permission from the Congress to reinstate forfeiture laws where they can take property even before you're prosecuted. He's gotten from the Congress money to go after medical marijuana states. He's demanded lists, the registries of medical patients in all those states that have medical marijuana to be sent to him. He's decided to hire 80 new assistant prosecutors just for California alone, and there's talk of similar numbers in Colorado, Washington State, and other states. He's making his preparations to remove all memos that run the Department of Justice. He's already removed 25. The Cole memo being the key one in terms of cannabis, yet to be removed officially, but already sanctioned to be removed. The 25 that were removed as examples. He stated recently before Law Society that there will be no memos running the Department of Justice anymore. That's no memos, including the Cole memo. He simply wants his U.S. attorneys to use existing law. He said as much before society just last month. The man's preparing himself. Meanwhile, you have, of all people, ex-Richard Nixon aide, Roger Stone, Nixon's major trickster, coming into our movement saying that he's going to save us by getting federal reclassification, that he has the president's ear, that he'll move ahead, and who is this guy? He's got a history of being deep state and mafia connected. There's story after story about him connecting him up with dirty tricks since Nixon. Now he's coming into our movement. He's going to save us by changing the federal classification. Then you have the third group, people that just did AMA, billionaire Silicon Valley types that are more often associated with the Soros circle. In other words, the Purple Revolt. In other words, the resistance against Trump. So we have these three groups. Which one do you think the president will favor? I don't believe he's going to favor those that would like to run against him in the next election, such as the lieutenant governor of California, who's going to become the governor, and then if AMA's allowed to stand, we'll have a nice slush fund to use to run against Trump. I don't think Trump's going to favor AMA as one of the three groups, those people that were behind AMA. I don't think he's going to be favorable to commercial marijuana. Then you have Sessions that remains, and you have Roger Stone and his people. It'll be one of those two that the president will give a nod to. Neither of which is good news for the cannabis community. Add to that very interestingly, in other countries where they're having similar elections and similar political issues, you have this police state mafia types like Roger Stone's friends rising up and trying to take over in those countries. To quote the late great American writer William S. Burroughs, this is a conspiracy of international proportions.
Didn't Kennedy say the same thing?
He wasn't referring to the police setting up a worldwide apparatus.
Well, according to the Dana Beal lecture, the 4-hour series I put on, this goes all the way back to the early 40s, Nazism, KKK, and all kinds of other organizations.
Well, I'm not so
historically.
I'm not so aware of Dana's positions on the subject. Although I must say that there are a lot of kind of right-wing Nazi mentalities involved. Like I say, we're talking about Richard Nixon's ex-assistant here. We're talking about people like Amato coming in wanting to represent being a lobbyist, a marijuana lobbyist in Washington. We've got people like him in Canada wanting to be lobbyists there. The point is, without knowing much about what Dana Beal has to say about all this, the fact is, at this point in history, there are these three groups. One that's interested in commercial legalization, such as on a state level. The other one, Roger Stone's group. And then Sessions, who wants to shut it all. That's really how it breaks down. And when you go back to the early 10% solution lectures at the Ronald Reagan Institute that I revealed in 2009, 2010, the whole idea of breaking it all down into 10%. In other words, there's only 10% as much access, 10% as many strains as was available, 10% as many people involved. That's the second to last step before zero. The 10% solution always goes to zero. So it could be that Sessions will be the winner in all this, but the way it looks, the cannabis community is not going to do well, no matter which of the three end up the winner. Because really, all use is medicinal use.
Sure.
It's all about restoring health. And when you look objectively at the word recreational, you'll find that the Latin root of that term means to restore health, or the French root means to revive health. This reframing of the term in a dishonest way, it means something different than medical use, was so that they could sell smaller bags for more money and share the extra profits with those that would otherwise prosecute them. It was a dishonest thing to do. They ripped off the medicinal use movement. And some who have cash registers ringing will deny it right up until the time their doors come off their hinges. But I would say that if Stone fails to influence the president, then certainly Sessions will go ahead with what he's planning. And he certainly is planning to come after us. All you have to look at what he's done in the past, in the recent past, as Attorney General. He's certainly prepping himself to come after the cannabis community in the United States.
Well, we seem to be observing patterns similar to 2007 in California, the run to get licenses and businesses and establishments. And you're basically saying that regardless of all the BCC licensing, mega dispensaries like Harborside could easily be raided and targeted by the DEA.
Absolutely. People that are involved in state politics, both for and against cannabis, they're running on their own timetable. They're running on their own agenda. They're not looking up. They're not involved in what's happening at the other level. It's like a parallel they're doing their thing. They're running on their own energy. But the fact is that in the end, federal law, excuse the expression, trumps state law. And if there is no Cole memo, there is no permissions to have state laws for cannabis. That was the permission. If that's gone, then there won't be any future elections of that sort, and those that have already happened will be in perilous positions. And you'll also notice, as time passes, that when it becomes apparent what the feds are going to do, state authority will mock them. And investors, their advisors will tell them, it's too dangerous, don't invest in this. Many won't even have to be prosecuted. They'll simply close.
Out of fear.
Absolutely.
So,
They have advisors telling them to invest money in something when there's so many threats.
Describe for patients or caregivers the loss of entitlement that you described to me.
Well, one of the things Sessions has done is he's made a demand on the medical marijuana states that have registries to send him the registries. And I believe 3 states have already complied. But the point is not that they will be prosecuted. He's going to, if he prosecutes anyone, prosecute the growers, prosecute the distribution chain, prosecute the actual retail locations. If the DEA happens to come in and there are people in there, perhaps they will be prosecuted as well. But the patients themselves, medical marijuana patients, I don't believe he's going to prosecute them. He is demanding lists of who's on the registries to send those lists to the federal entitlement program, such as Social Security, because once the Cole memo is gone, the law still remains. It's unlawful to use cannabis products. And when you use drugs that are unlawful, the entitlement agencies are duty-bound to remove you from receiving whatever entitlements you were getting. You're no longer eligible. You could reapply, but if you're on SSI, Medicaid, Medicare, or whatever you're on, as a disability, they can take that away. They don't have to go to court. There doesn't have to be a hearing. Your own signing off on the registry is evidence that you did not comply with the federal statutes necessary to continue receiving your entitlements. They will receive, in my view, worse treatment than prosecution. They'll be thrown in the streets without their medication, without the money to pay their rent.
That's terrible.
Otherwise, why would he call up those lists?
Do you think California was one of the lists turned in? State ID people?
3 states, every state that has medical marijuana has received a demand. That's the way I understand it, that Department of Justice under Sessions sent them all a demand. Every state that wherever there's medical marijuana, they have received a demand. As to compliance, I believe that Maine, Massachusetts, Michigan, and maybe one other have already complied. The point is not how many have complied. The point is, what is the intention of the Attorney General in making the demand? He's certainly not going to be prosecuting them all. What he's going to do is turn their names over to the federal entitlement agencies to have them stricken from the rolls.
So basically, you're seeing a lot of people being hurt from the medicinal side. The recreational side or the industrial hemp sides are likely in the same danger.
Well, they'll be prosecuted. They'll be raided and prosecuted, where the others will just receive a letter that they're not going to be getting their check next month, that they no longer have a medical coverage, that sort of thing.
So Dana Beal's arrest or the Colorado raids or the San Diego raids that we're experiencing at the end of this year are basically going to get worse.
Well, so far they haven't been federal. I'm talking about federal. And it's true that state authority often mocks what they think the feds are about to do. But you know, I'm much more concerned about defense. Because after all, when you talk about medical marijuana, you're talking about patients. When you're talking about patients, you can assume the majority of them are on some sort of entitlement. After all, they're ill. So they're just going to get wiped out if they lose their entitlements. How can they live?
Let me give you a scenario. In California, right now, we're experiencing more raids, and on January 1st, over 99% of the state will not have filed new permits to the BCC. So
They will not have filed that.
They will not have filed for new licenses with the Bureau of Cannabis Control. And therefore will all be illegal in the state of California.
Well, that may be. There's all sorts of infighting that goes on when a new law comes into effect on a state level, because there's all sorts of people trying to vie for power and trying to snuff out others that are already have certain rights. So there's all sorts of infighting on a state level. It happens in every single state so far. It'll happen in California, but in a bigger way, because it's a bigger state. There's more at stake. But really, the truth be known, before the Cole Memo was written, giving permission to states to basically write cannabis law, that is to have elections of the people that are later amended. But the fact is, before there was the Cole Memo, there was Janet Reno's permissions and prohibitions, where she points out that the federal Constitution prohibits any government, including the federal, from attempting to inhibit an election of the people, a direct vote of the people, a plebiscite. Nor can they set aside the outcome of such an election. That was Janet Reno's permissions after 215. However, she finished the paragraph by saying her prohibitions, should state governments attempt to bind over or write regulatory or amend these laws, they themselves are not protected by the federal Constitution. They themselves are open to federal prosecution. And that's why, for many years, 215 was not only not bound over, there were no amendments written until 420, which came years later, after they had a more, say, a less hostile White House. But up until then, Sacramento didn't have the nerve, because they feared for their own selves that they would be prosecuted. That was her threat. What removed that threat was the Cole Memo. So now that the Cole Memo is about to be removed, you're back to Janet Reno's permissions and prohibitions, and we're not sure that Sessions, and my group's not sure that Sessions will even respect that. As he said recently, all he's going to go on are the laws as written by the Congress, not memos, not past notations from earlier attorney generals such as Janet Reno, just the law. And it is illegal under just the law. We haven't changed the federal law. And that is the big threat, really, to the cannabis community in the United States. However you want to cut it, recreational use, medical use, whatever you want to call it, decrim, he's coming after us. And who is he? You know, he's the U.S. Attorney General, the highest-ranking law enforcement official next to the president. So you have to look at it from a political view. Well, if the president can somehow inhibit anything terrible happening to us, what is it most likely that he'll do? I do believe that he'll support his attorney general, or he'll go with the Stone Group. I don't see him supporting Alma. It may continue. We may have to go to court. Say the state of California goes to court, somebody goes to court, try to block them from stopping it. But I do believe sooner or later, either Stone gets his way or Sessions comes after us all. It's one of the two.
Sure. And posing a comparison for between Harry Anslinger and Jeff Sessions, and I wanted you to elaborate on the two because I think you were very profound in that.
Well, I think that Anslinger was a true believer. I believe that Anslinger was insane. He was insane on the subject, and therefore he was sincere. He believed what he was doing. He's an evil man who believed he was good. I don't see Mr. Sessions that way. He's a cynical man that knows very well what he's doing. Much more dangerous than even Anslinger.
Bad dude.
Well, isn't he the one that said that he thought the Ku Klux Klan was a good group till he found out they smoked cannabis?
Yeah, there's, again, it's propaganda.
Isn't he the one that said that people that use cannabis are not good people?
He's been quoted for saying some pretty nasty things.
Well, the fact is that he attributes Sessions, that is, attributes a lot of problems in this country to a group of people he conceives of as being made up of cannabis users. No, he doesn't get it. He doesn't. The reason that he's going after medical is because that we've already put medical in a bad way as a community. We've made less of it. We tried to go along with those that reframed the term. I don't know why we did that. We all know the use of cannabis is a medical activity. Patients in denial, for whatever their reasons, fear of arrest, or they simply don't want to admit they're ill, were the original problem. And that problem has been utilized by our enemies.
Well, I observed the state of California with doctors' identity theft and Skype fraud and so many different aspects of the medical board not even being able to control medical marijuana properly. It became relatively unsafe to participate.
Well, sure, that happened. That was some of the early attacks on us. Certainly, there were all kinds of different methods that were set up where you could see a doctor. It eventually became, to some extent, electronic, where you could sit in a room and the doctor would be somewhere else by Skype, etc. And that was done in other countries, too. It was done in Canada.
Except the guy on TV wasn't a doctor.
The point is, these are individual criminals committing individual crimes. Where I'm not saying all of it is a criminal. We use the electronics of the day, but yes, there were people that committed crimes. But that doesn't consult with the law itself. The people passed this law. This is the will of the people. 215 was the will of the people.
Sure.
And if we wanted to go on, we should have legalized federally ourselves. We should have put our efforts into that. I was always for that. Dennis was always for that. The fact is, states got authority to be the arbiters because of the Cole Memo. And the Cole Memo was created at a time when George Soros had the most influence in the White House he ever had. And what did it do? It, without changing the federal law, allowed those close to federal government to go to state government, who is then given sort of a permission to run things. The Cole Memo allowed them to have these elections as long as they did what? Had robust regulatory activity. And what does that mean? That means that those with deep enough pockets, extremely wealthy organizations that could put up with the deep regulations would be the only ones that state authority could okay, which is exactly what the Soros Circle wanted. So that the feds wouldn't even have to legalize federally. They would just warn the state authority that if they don't follow robust regulatory, they're going to come after them. And if they do follow it, they won't, which completely knocks out mom and pop, completely knocks out the small guy.
Right.
That was the purpose. Right. That was the purpose of the Cole Memo.
And with that in mind, can you help pose the risks and harms of creating a newer and potentially larger black market?
Well, of course, it serves the interests of those in the prison industrial complex to have a larger black market. And when you have robust regulatory, where only the big money can come in and run things, other people get locked out of it, and they go then into some portion of them don't give up. They go into the illicit markets. That's why you have both, which of course serves the prison industrial complex, because then you still have arrests, or, police authorities still have work to do, etc. So if you go federally, that you still have regulatory. You still can have deep pockets involved, but there is a better chance for anybody that has a purpose, a legitimate purpose, to become involved.
Sure.
I do believe the Cole Memo was an outgrowth. They saw an opportunity, and they used Oaksterdam and the Prop 19 election to establish the Cole Memo. It was because of those confrontations with the federal government during that election process that the Cole Memo was able to be written. And I've always suspected that Prop 19 was an attempt to give the federal government the excuse to write the Cole Memo. So I do believe that there is a conspiracy that goes back even before the Cole Memo.
Could you elaborate to me the federalization of medical marijuana or marijuana in general, and do you foresee it, how soon it will start? I know it's speculative.
So once the decision is made as to whether Sessions is coming or not, if Sessions is stopped by the president, somehow a different outcome happens because of the presidential intervention. Say, I'm wrong, and the president allows AMA to go forward and other states to have elections where they can end up with commercial operations like AMA. Then at some point, I do believe the Congress might move to change the classification, but it would still be big, deep pockets only at that point. We'd have to fight for our rights all over again, I think. In regards to Sessions, though, I still think there'd be a place for the Attorney General, even if it was legalized at a federal level, because they'd have regulations, and those who don't follow the regulations will be prosecuted, just as they are on the state level now. It's just who's going to run it. If it's going to continue, who's going to run it? And I would say that if it continues, it's likely for political reasons that the president will not side with people who are against him politically, and certainly those that put AMA in place and that will gain from it are his enemies politically. You have a lieutenant governor that wants to become governor. He'll have that fund that's coming in from AMA use. He also wants to run against Trump himself in the next presidential, or so the rumor goes. And so I just don't see Trump going with them. In my view, it will be federal legalization through the Stone Group, or it will be Sessions doing his thing, which is to shut everything. And of course, it will follow worldwide. I do believe what we do on this subject will be repeated worldwide.
And with that in mind, Leland, can you elaborate for me? We can still use grassroots methods phone calls to the White House, letters to the president and Jeff Sessions from, you know, those kind of methods we've used in the past, trying to make this path towards legalization and patient safety. Do you see those methods working for us if we team together with letter writing or other websites that do the whole?
Obviously, if there's enough of an uproar among the people, you know, the politicians follow. But we are so fragmented at this point. They have done so much damage to us that many of us don't even know what side to really be on. And to reorganize, to put it all back together again, it's possible. That's possible. But in the meantime, they will do us great harm. And as you say, they're already started on the state levels.
Jack Herer's initiative is coming back.
What's that?
The Jack Herer initiative is still pushing for 2018.
Once again, you're introducing the idea of a state initiative. If you're talking about federal, that's a different matter. But again, states having initiatives on cannabis without it being challenged, that happened due to the Cole Memo. What will the Sessions do about the Cole Memo? People argue with me that, oh, it's not gone yet, because he took out 25 other memos as examples. But he made clear that they're all going. And the idea that the Cole Memo hasn't gone yet makes me even more suspicious. In other words, he's getting everything else he needs lined up. And once that last gate opens, once the matter of the president, you know, chiming in his position, which he hasn't done, he's been obvious. It should be obvious to those that study this. The president hasn't said a word since the election what he's going to do about this. And so he's going to have his last word. And when he does, either Sessions will have to rethink his position or he'll be ready to do whatever he wants, because look what he's already accomplished. He has the funding as of January to come after medical. He has the laws reinstated for during the raids that would happen. He can actually confiscate property. He has the forfeiture laws back in place. He's demanded the lists of medical patients from states that have registries. It should be clear to anyone that these are preliminary steps to come after us.
So basically, Prop 64 or in general are not going to help. The Bureau of Cannabis Control isn't going to really help businesses in California establish.
Well, there will be some states and some state departments that resist whatever the feds do. But for how long? You know, the fact is, when it becomes clear that this is not going to be allowed under this administration, these different departments will stop doing it. They may be tearful about it. They may say they regret it, but when they're faced with prosecution, I don't think that these legislators, state legislators, county, local, village, whoever's writing amendments, are going to continue doing so.
Right. Well, we can already see by San Diego's roll, they're rolling back before the first, shutting down every dispensary they can, which is definitely an access problem for legitimate patients. Meanwhile, San Francisco, San Jose, the Bay Area have all filed their permits.
Well, that's to be expected. Until AMA is knocked down by the feds, it's the law. And AMA will be, the law until the feds do something about it. If they indeed do anything about it, that's who's going to do something about it. In the meantime, the state authority have their responsibilities. This is a law that's passed and goes into effect and in stages. And what isn't allowed will not be allowed. So, of course, there are always going to be law enforcement that jump the gun, that come in early. They always do that. We're almost at January here, and, under AMA, 215 is dead.
So Prop 64 killed Prop 215.
Pardon me?
Proposition 64 basically killed Prop 215.
Well, with the earlier legislation that the governor passed and AMA, where is their 215? 215 is gone.
Well, I'm proof from SB 420, the state ID program, on behalf of Jason Andrews, our corporation, state ID cards, our doctor's letters, our patients' concerns or needs were ignored by the courts. And that was 5 years of trials. So I actually did take action, filed a massive complaint to the Department of Consumer Affairs, to the new Bureau of Cannabis Control. And I uploaded my documents and evidence to their handy new server. And I will be posting a link for others on this page to be able to go to the complaint page if you have lost or suffered as a patient in California.
Well, certainly the courts will still exist in January 2018. However, should the Fed's through sessions activities come, many of these departments will just evaporate. You still will have access to the courts. If you have an issue, you can go to court. But many of these departments that are set up under these laws, if these laws are knocked out, so are the departments. They simply won't exist anymore. And it's so raw that the author of the Washington recreational law, when asked in a free weekly in Seattle what she thought would happen or could happen, her advice was that we destroy all our records in the state of Washington, the nuclear option. This was her suggestion. The author is Allison Holcrum, the author of our recreational law in Washington State. Her advisory to us is to destroy the files. So, by the way, she also was a helpful co-author of AMA. In fact, your Northern California Normal gave her an award at a recent Cannabis Cup in Sonoma, the most recent. So it's this kind of environment where people are getting awards, actually the ones with the knives out, cutting our throats and asking for us to thank them. This is her solution. This is how she's going to save us in Washington State. We should destroy our records before the feds arrive.
Wow.
I don't need an attorney to give me that kind of advice. I can get that advice in an alley.
So we're basically going back into the dark ages.
Well, that's what Sessions wants. And as far as Roger Stone's concerned, he says he wants to change the law federally, and he has his friends that he always has with him to help him, the deep state mafia. Maybe Trump will support that. But one should not forget that the 10% solution ultimately goes to zero. So should they decide, if they indeed are the ones that are allowed to persist, that after they've taken over, it's time to shut it down, it'll be much easier if you're running everything to shut it down than if you got 50,000 growers out there and you don't know their addresses.
If it's established, then
one way or another, they're consolidating their power over our entire community.
Of course. And as a result to that, and me being kind of like a media service, I should be trying to encourage our listeners and our viewers to still write letters to deschedule or reschedule and write and rewrite established banking laws we can operate safely and professionally?
Well, first of all, I'll deal with the smaller issue first. Bank laws don't have to be changed. Simply open your accounts with credit unions. Don't report. Credit unions are member-owned, and there are already numerous credit unions throughout the U.S. that represent the interests in open accounts for both medical and recreational use dispensaries. Now, you run into problems with banking law, maybe someday you'll get that changed. But in the meantime, you have a perfectly good way of having a banking institution handle your accounts. You'll find a much friendlier reception at the credit unions in America than the banks. And then, as far as protecting us in the future, the three options that are out there that we just reviewed, they could be altered slightly, giving the president 5 options. For instance, in the case of AMA, in the case of commercial legalization, the option that patients could have the right to cultivate if they can't find a strain matched to their condition within the retail marketplace, that would be good, and that would make it slightly different. In the case of Sessions getting his way, 100 plants or less collectives of patients would be more likely not bothered because of an administrative policy in the Department of Justice, which says that they must, and have for 35 plus years, prioritize their budgets. So obviously they'll go after a 10,000 plant grow down the road rather than spending their resources on 15 patients that have a collective of less than 100 plants. So the 100 plant limit in a non-public patient collective in a state that has a medical marijuana law would stop state authority from coming after the collective, and would stop the feds because of the financial considerations. And that would afford a kind of protection. As to the amendments to initiatives that have already become law, I think they would have to go. And that would also protect patients in smaller collectives, because they'd be operating like 215 did before it had any amendments, before 420 or any of the other regulatory. We did exist, we did operate, we did deliver services to patients, and we did so without profit, and as I say, we did so for a number of years successfully without any regulations or amendments to these plebiscites, to these direct votes of the people. So they can't be removed by the feds. They'll remain in place. And if that's all that remains in place, we could still find a way to alter Sessions' position slightly, as I say. And that would give the president another choice there. The same goes for the Stone position. You might even be able to give him 6 choices. In other words, altering the 3 options slightly, giving patients the right to opt out and grow their own, to find a proper match. And I have to tell you that would help. That would not only help, it would happen a lot. Because the truth is, when you look around the states that do have recreational use, you can find as many licensed providers growing it as you wish. But when you get down to the retail level, to the shops, you have hundreds of choices, not thousands, hundreds. Now, in studies in Canada where they had federal permissions for patients to grow on a federal level, they were allowed to search the world for a seed match to their condition. And on average, it took them 3 years. 3 years with 15,000 choices. How long is an American patient going to look to find a proper match when they walk into these recreational stores where they have to pay and they only have 150 choices? I'll tell you how long. An eternity. Many will never find a match that way, which is a moral grounds for patients to have the right to opt out and grow their own, so that they can find a match to their condition.
And you mentioned in Colorado that they won't be able to grow as of the 1st?
Starting January 1st in Colorado, there will be patient raids on homes It's unconstitutional. Activists there are already complaining about it. I got messages even as late as today. They're going to come into these people's homes who they have the names and addresses of because of the registries and check out whether or not they've shut down.
Ugly.
Very ugly. Very ugly. We always knew in Colorado, they took it with a grain of salt. People were clapping and happy, but when you look at state government, we still have plenty of enemies in high places, and they work against us every day. That's true in most every state.
So we have to unify and still do letter campaigns and phone call rallies, maybe even having people who can fund call centers.
Well, look, I've written about this many times. The truth is that we as a community are not big enough to stand up for ourselves. And there are many civil rights and human rights organizations that are in the same situation as the cannabis community, just not big enough to stand up for themselves. And so what I have suggested over and over again for years is that our community find common vulnerability with other communities that share that common vulnerability and come together as a juggernaut of many civil rights and human rights organizations fighting together for all our interests, not just as the cannabis community. After all, that's how our adversaries do it. For instance, the Trump juggernaut now will include other groups that have nothing to do with their primary interests, but together they're stronger and stronger. So that's what we have to do. Other people that are not part of the cannabis community that will support our interests, who have human rights and civil rights issues of their own that we can support, we all have to come together. Otherwise, how can we win? We're just not strong enough alone. We must come together with those other human rights and civil rights groups that have common vulnerabilities that are being focused on as we are by the same adversaries. That's what they do. That's what we must do.
I don't even know how to describe my disappointment with the 2 terms of the Obama administration, where a fellow smoker like, Obama would be able to, at least make that rescheduling decision. Held the pen for 8 years.
Look, this goes back to Prop 19, that period. It goes back to the Cole Memo that was written under Obama. They did not confront the issue. They put it off onto state authority. That's what the Cole Memo does. They threaten the state. If you have regulatory that's not robust enough, we'll come after you. If it's too close to a school, we'll come after you. Under certain circumstances, we'll come after you. Which means that if you meet all of these requirements, we will not come after you, and you can be the main arbiter and meet with big marijuana and make deals with the deep pockets. We can't. There's a federal law against it, but you can do it. What we'll do is we'll give you just a little bit of space to do it. Here's a memo. So they have this memo at the Justice Department that allows for state authority to get away with writing regulatory on initiatives that have to do with cannabis. So that's how they did it. But that never afforded us real protection. If they would have had the courage of their convictions, they would have changed the federal law.
And so you expect letters in Washington, like the landlord letters?
Do I what?
I don't know if in California dispensaries or and property owners would get landlord letters from the DEA.
Oh yes, they even did that to us on Market. That they threatened to confiscate the property. Well, of course that's going to happen again. I mean, the Sessions has reinstituted the forfeiture laws. He can threaten them with that. That's what I'm saying. As a New York professor of law said last year, many people that have investment money that want to come into the cannabis industry, they won't have to be threatened. They'll just be told it's not a good place. Their advisors will tell them it's not a good place to invest because this guy is doing these things. In other words, many places will not have to be raided. They'll simply fold on their own.
And people who actively try to work within the re-emerging black market could easily get hurt and literally killed, like people like me who tried to stand up for patients. And when dispensaries stole 42 pounds, I would get, dicked around by a cop who would pretend that he would change his name and fake out.
It's clear to me that if Sessions gets his way, not only will he be prosecuting people that operate under state law, but he'll have a burgeoning black market to go after as well. So it's a win-win for the prison industrial complex.
So, yeah, that pretty much covers. I'm trying to think of what areas we haven't hit. Is there any other words of advice that you'd like to give to our listeners and viewers?
Well, sure. It all has to do with, the truth about the plant is that it has many uses, but in terms of medicinal use, there's many thousands of different strains, one of which may match your condition. To ferret all that out, you need a healthy cannabis community that's free to operate. This is taking us in the wrong direction, and because of that, there'll be later medical journals reporting in other words, they'll have disappointing results, and the plant will again be maligned. It's the most maligned plant on earth. And once again, there'll be scientific reports saying that the results were disappointing, and the reason why is because there'll be less strain availability. Less strain availability, less matches to condition. I'll tell you a story even beyond the 15,000 to give you an idea of the enormity of it. There was this MS patient I knew about in Canada. After years, actually in her case 4 years, she found a strain that actually relieved all of her symptoms of multiple sclerosis.
Wow.
But
I did quite a bit of MS research.
There was a problem. Although it relieved all her symptoms, it gave her migraine headaches. So she couldn't use it. So she gave the strain she had developed that she couldn't use to another friend of hers who also had MS. And about a year or so later, she was visiting this friend. The friend had taken the strain and was using it successfully. And so she tried it too. And it worked great, relieved all her symptoms as before, and there were no migraine headaches. Why was that? It was a later generation of that strain. Something that big grows will never do for you. Something that retail commercial outlets will never do for you. They may even have the strain you need, but they don't have it in the right generation. Will they give it to you later? Of course not. Something you could do for yourself, they will not do.
How many clone generations do you think a plant should go through before you start from a new seed?
Well, that's the thing, in that one case, it's just an example of what I'm getting at, is that the numbers are even bigger than 15,000. What I'm getting at is there's tens of thousands of combinations. Now, there's this argument from the commercial growers, from their circle. Well, all you need is about 160 certain strains to cover all the conditions that afflict mankind. There's an expert from Israel that presented about 3 years ago in in Czechoslovakia at a cannabis convention there, where he presented 160 strains he had done research on to show that they covered all the conditions. Of course, he didn't deal with the later generational question, but the point is that while he was trying to help the commercial industry by saying all we need is these 160, he indirectly made my case for me. Because the 160 strains he tested all had different effects on the end user. No one of them the same as the other 159. Any mathematician worth his salt, any symbolic logician worth the money will tell you that if you have 160 units of something within one category, where every one of them is different than the other, you can extrapolate that out to 10,000 to 100,000, and they will always be different than the others.
But couldn't you say that for one seed variety? Like, hypothetically, a strain like Blue Dream.
The point of this is that there is no way a retail enterprise, in considering their costs and what they have to do to operate as a business, can offer to a patient the wide selection that a patient could get themselves. So, if you cannot get a proper match through the retail commercial enterprises that are available, you should be allowed to opt out.
Well, what about testing? Do you believe in the gold standard? Or is that a fraud itself to believe that we can actually accurately measure all the different variables?
The fact is that in this case of this MS patient, it gave her relief in every way, but it also gave her a migraine. So she had to go to a later generation. So it's not just 15,000 choices, it's 15,000 plus X, X equaling how many generations later, in other words, you're getting into thousands of different strains, tens of thousands of choices. And it takes a number of years to find. First, you start with the proper category, of course, and we have all the new technologies to do analysis of what the ratios are and all of that. That's all very helpful. But the point is, growers that are licensed providers that supply the retail marketplace are going to grow strains dependent on their business model. Now, they may be conscientious and try to cover all the conditions that they can, but the fact is that many patients will not get a good match, and they should be, on moral grounds, free to opt out and grow their own.
Sure.
And in other words, those that are calling for commercial recreational cannabis laws are also calling for monopoly. And at almost every state where monies are put together to have elections for recreational use, they call for monopolies. These monopolies then close the door on patients opting out and finding a proper match. They're stuck with what's available. And what's available will not cover most of them. So that's why I think the moral wrong is being done.
And it's just perplexing at times because I see so many different things, and now that we're into the genetic discussion, I mean, like I said, my thought was like, you take one strain like Blue Dream, not even its hybrid, but just taking Blue Dream, and let's say we take 10 seeds, and each one creates a very differing variety of Blue Dream. You get a different thing, or different, strength and potencies just for one strain.
Exactly. And it goes on and on. In Canada, they had a case that went to the Supreme Court in Canada over edibles. The argument was They don't allow edibles. Patients should be allowed to have edibles because some patients can't get relief unless it's an edible. This is the same argument as the strain argument in terms of the morality of it. In other words, you can't inhibit people from aspiring to find superior effective relief of all of their symptoms. It's in common law. It's in Section 7 of the Canadian Constitution. So they went all the way to the Supreme Court and argued patients have the right to have the plant in any form because some forms do not work for some patients and some forms do. So we're talking in terms of form. They ruled in favor of the patients. Now, how is that different than strain? There is no difference. It's all about inhibiting the individual's right to aspire to find superior effective relief.
And on that note, can you help me clear up for some people in our audience who may have questions about hemp-derived CBD products?
I didn't hear you. Clear up.
Sorry for the delay in my Facebook phone. But to address for new users who are trying to obtain CBD products that are supposedly becoming more available, but technically less available as you've described by the upcoming restrictions.
Well, there's two kinds of restrictions. The one is, of course, such as this recent move by the federal government to establish laws against CBDs by scheduling them. But even though they're what they are, they're not, they're something special, so now they have a new classification for them to make them illegal. And that's one kind. But really the bigger threat, frankly, is the business model, the recreational business model, recreational cannabis use business model will never allow for anything less than a monopoly. That's what makes it so evil. If it was a virtual monopoly, where they still allowed patients to opt out to find a strain match their condition, where it couldn't be found in the recreational environment, then it wouldn't be as evil. But that's not what they do. They really do reveal who they are. They really do reveal that they're not about the people. They're not about patients. They're not about goodwill. It's the bottom line. Like in every other part of the greater society. Dennis Perron said it in 1995-96 at Market Street. He said it. Will there be compassion, or is it just going to be greed? This movement of ours, like Dennis said, it's a metaphor on the greater society. Is it just all going to be greed? Because if you set up monopolies, and these recreational cannabis states are all monopolies, then patients can't opt out legally and grow their own. Then it is all about greed. Where would there be any compassion in a monopoly? Where it limits strain availability, it limits the amount, it limits the form, and of course then later reportage in scientific journals will be disappointing. So eventually the plant gets a bad name again. It's just all about the money, and it shouldn't be. So is it so terrible to alter these things slightly and allow for patients to opt out? Who's saying it's so terrible to do that? The people that want to run it. They want a monopoly. So under them, you just get what they have. And if you don't like it, too bad.
So it sounds like we need a couple more cards to turn and try to do a follow-up interview in February.
Well, we'll see what's left in February.
If anything striking happens before, I may call you to do a sooner interview. But I think based on our speculation and the information you've provided, I'm grateful and thankful for you to take this much time with me and our audience to address these incredible issues.
Yes, and if you wanted to, you can always put my name in the search engine at FB along with tag words like cannabis species, monopoly, cannabis monopoly. You can put things in like organize, Leland Cole. You put in my name and you put in these keywords, and you'll start coming up with essays. I did a lot of studies of this in the Canadian context, but it's the same. It's the same questions, the same moral issues, the same legal issues, the same business issues. Mm-hmm. It's all the same.
If you have any articles you want me to post along with this, that would be great. And I'll put them in the chat section. And you viewers out there, please make sure to leave your comments so we can, ask Leland Cole. Thank you so much, Leland.
Yes, you can always do that. You can always, most of the action in my world's on my page. I've never removed anything. It's a chronological record all the way back to 2009. So it's all there. I've been over these issues over and over again, and probably in a much neater way than simply talking on the telephone. There are essays that have been written on the subject. And I have many adversaries, and many of them simply just want there to be silence on the subject. But I've never agreed to that.
Well, I'm incredibly thankful for you to speak out today with us on my show. And I will try to integrate this into the final documentary film as we, change into this Prop 64 or recreational across the states issue.
Well, I'll tell you, I'll just leave you and your listeners and viewers with this final point. Don't believe Lee Cole. Check your dictionary. Recreational, Latin root, to restore health. French root, to revive health. It has nothing to do with euphoria, as it's been presented. It's about medical use.
You and Dennis always say it, all use is medical.
We don't have to say it. It's in the dictionary. They changed the word. It was a dishonest reframing of the term to serve vested interests.
Well, I think we've covered the points here, Leland. I'm going to end the call and finish this live broadcast and replay it for everybody because I'm just recording for the relive broadcast, and I'll try to add in some notes and stuff for the screen. Did a great job, Leland. Thanks again.
Very good, man. Try to have a happy new year.
I hope your holidays have been a joy, and you've made my new year a joy by giving me this great piece to present to our audience.
Yes, and as I say, there's plenty of keywords. If they want to do other studies, they should look under the term cannabis Vichy. That's a good place to start.
How do you spell Vichy for our audience?
V-I-C-H-Y.
V-I-C-H-Y. Vichy.
Just put my name in cannabis Vichy.
I will do a search. I will do my research just as you have given me more research and knowledge and information to flood my brain with.
I'll send you more materials that have already appeared.
Wow, I can't wait to air this for everyone to hear you. I'm thrilled. Thanks again.
Ciao.
Take care. And that, my friends, is Leland Cole, and this is Hemp for Victory live broadcast for the 29th of 2017. We're wrapping up the year, so please make sure to donate to the fundraiser. Help me spread the word, because, again, we just spent an hour and 9 minutes, and my documentary film has to fit into 3 hours, and you compress 10 years into this tiny little frame. It gets so big, can't fit in the frame. And what happens is I've got more footage and more interviews and more information that I know what to do with. And this fundraiser needs your support for the Hemp for Victory final cuts. That's 3 movies at least. 3 movies, not 0. Make sure to tune in catch the rebroadcast. If you're watching the broadcast, thank you for tuning in. If you're watching live, thank you for tuning in. We'll make sure to have an administrator in the chat room to chat with you during this live broadcast or rebroadcast. And thanks again for watching Hemp for Victory Live. Peace.